I'm John Batchelor. Larry Kudlow, CNBC, my colleague and co-host and friend, is here. And so Bill Whalen, my colleague and friend from the Hoover Institution. Gentlemen, we turn to the Republicans after exhausting ourselves speculating on the spontaneity of Mrs. Clinton's campaign. The Republicans in the CBS poll are doing very well, thank you very much. 70% of the respondents to this poll have a favorable opinion of George W. Bush, and 49% of conservative Republican voters in this poll think Mr. Bush's stances on Jeb Bush's stances on the issues is about right. We'll turn to Jeb Bush in a moment, but first, the new entries, Dr. Carson, Carly Fiorina, and Mike Huckabee. These are wannabes in the party, but they give the party depth and breadth, something it lacked in 2012. And Larry, there are a lot of cabinet chairs that need to be filled. Is that a fair assessment of these candidacies?
Well, before we get to the cabinet, I think that particularly Dr. Carson and Carly Fiorina really bring something to the table and are going to be very interesting in debates, and in particular, regarding Carson. I mean, he's a flat taxer. He wants to reform Obamacare. He's for health savings accounts. But, John, what I really like about him is he has a high moral tone. He has a high cultural tone. He speaks openly about the deprivations of family breakup and their contribution to poverty. He speaks openly about unwed mothers and fathers who walk away from their children and the kind of damage that all this does to their children and to places like Baltimore, Maryland, where we've thrown trillions of dollars at them. I think that is something first of all, it needs to be said, and second of all, he is going to say it. And I think that's going to be his singular and very important contribution.
Mr. Whalen, is Carly Fiorina a tool that the Republicans lacked?
Well, she is obviously the only woman in a field that is otherwise male, so she stands out. She may pop on the debate stage, and she has gone after Hillary Clinton with a vengeance that no other Republican has so far, and that's her strategy here. And it's interesting. She ran for the Senate in California back in 2010, and she was a political neophyte at the time, and she made a lot of rookie mistakes in that regard. In 2016, you see her running a much smarter campaign focused on Hillary, not attacking Jeb Bush, which would probably be the natural temptation to do as an outsider, and maybe positioning herself for something down the road.
You know, John, just on that, she brings, yes, she's a woman. She's also worked her way up from being a secretary to being the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. But she also rails on really hard against crony capitalism and corporate welfarism. And she wants to have a complete tax reform in order to stop all this cronyism. That's a great program, a great policy, a great message coming from Republicans who oftentimes align themselves, with the Chamber of Commerce or just big business in general. Carly's coming out against that. I like that a lot.
What do you make of her skills on stage, Larry? You've talked to her many times. Is she going to stand out in the debate starting August?
I think she's going to do great because, as Bill suggested, she is much better candidate, much more polished than she was 5 years ago plus. And I have been with her at several forums, and I've watched her. Her messaging is much sharper than it was, and her speaking style is much sharper than it was. And, yeah, I think she's going to have an impact.
And I turn, Bill, just momentarily to Mr. Huckabee. Why is he doing this again? Do we know? He says that he has roads to follow. But at the same time, he had a very successful Fox television show. Why give it up for being in the back of the room?
I would assume because he could walk back to it if he wants to, that maybe there's an open-door policy there. James Carville once famously noted that running for president is a lot like having sex. Nobody does it the one time and walks away from it forever. And maybe this with Huckabee is a case where he has to do it one more time to get it out of his system. But, these three people who've jumped in this week, they have several things in common worth noting. One, are all running as real Washington political outsiders. And secondly, all have real rags-to-riches stories to tell, be it Carly Fiorina starting as a Kelly girl, be it Ben Carson growing up with poverty in Detroit, or as Huckabee today talking about growing up in Hope, Arkansas, and being from very humble roots. I think the problem moving forward, and I'll be curious to get Larry's take on this as well, is how do they grow as candidates? The problem with trying to climb the ladder in this race, there are always 2 or 3 bodies ahead of you at all times in the field because it's so darn crowded. So I'm not sure how a Huckabee gets out of Iowa. I'm not sure how Carly could break into a top tier, or Mike Huckabee could.
I would tend to agree with that. I would tend to... Hello?
Yeah, we're here.
Oh, good.
We're here.
I would tend to agree with what Bill Whalen's saying. I just don't see them breaking out. I think they'll be around for a couple of early debates. As I say, I think Ben Carson has a lot to say. I think Carly Fiorina has a lot to say. Regrettably and respectfully, I don't think Mike Huckabee has a lot to say. John, the Club for Growth is already running ads against him in Iowa because he was regarded as a taxer and a spender when he was governor of Arkansas. In terms of the evangelical vote, you got a couple of ministers' sons already in that race, Ted Cruz and Scott Walker. So I just don't see where Huckabee goes. I'm not sure what he's going to add to this. The other two, I don't see him breaking out, John, but as I said, I do think they have messages. I think they have good messages.
Let's go to the top tier. And Jeb Bush is often mentioned, but the weight of his brother is said to be a problem. In this new CBS poll, 73% of the Republican voters view George W. Bush favorably. That suggests that this is not going to be a burden for Governor Bush in the primaries. That's what we're dealing with here, getting a ticket out of Iowa, getting a ticket out of New Hampshire. And I'm struck by this, Larry. 49% of conservative Republican voters think Governor Jeb Bush's stance on the issues is about right. Does that surprise you, Larry? Well,
not really. I mean, look, Jeb Bush was a very conservative governor of Florida, and he is running as a conservative. There are some, he's got disputes, particularly with the restrictionist wing of the party on immigration.
Right.
And as he said in a speech, I don't know, yesterday or today, he's not going to back down. By the way, I happen to agree with some of that. I'm an immigration reformer, and I think that's pro-growth, although I object to how President Obama is going about it. But nonetheless, Jeff is standing tall, and I'm not surprised. But I think Scott Walker is doing extremely well. In a lot of polls, he's actually running ahead, or he's certainly in the top tier. Scott Walker is a guy who has a very strong political backbone, and he's a guy who appeals to a lot of segments of the Republican Party. He has the capacity to say very conservative things, which he believes in, good, but he says it in a moderate way, John. Reminds me of Ronald Reagan.
Bill, about Jeb Bush, is he a surprise success here, given how he's been pummeled these last months by I'm thinking of the strong conservative voices in the party?
Yeah, I think you're being a little too optimistic about this poll, John, in this regard, and with respect to the people who do these surveys. Just as with Hillary, where I think they ask the wrong questions, not do you like her, it's do you trust her. I think with Jeb Bush, the question is really not, how do you see his policies, it's do you see yourself voting for him. The Wall Street Journal, NBC News, did a rather devastating poll a couple of months ago where Bush had the highest negative rating among Republicans. In other words, Republicans saying that they would not vote for him. And that's the question in this race. Let's say Scott Walker stumbles down the path. Will Republicans turn to Jeb Bush and vote for him, or will they turn to Marco Rubio and vote for him? And that's why at this point I'm a little more interested in Rubio's candidacy, because if you do a scenario where maybe Walker stumbles or where Bush stumbles, I think Rubio is very well positioned to pick up the slack.
And I just want to add one thing. I guess I always do this when we talk politics. I still believe the most underrated guy in the race is Rick Perry, governor, a former Texas governor. A, because he has a great economic Texas track record to run on, and B, at a point where national security is going to be very important. He wore the uniform. He was in the Air Force. He was a captain and a pilot in the Air Force. And even though he's not showing up big in the polls, I still think he's the most underrated guy in the race. And if you talk about breakout potential, I would point to Rick Perry as a possibility.
We just have a minute, Larry. I want to press you on Rick Perry. When is the time to get in? I mean, we have Kasich as well. We have a lot of candidates right now, and we're ready for them. What are they waiting for?
Well, that's a good question. Perry has some legal issues in Austin, Texas that have to be resolved. He's running in this campaign against a Democratic U.S. attorney or local attorney. That's a problem for him. And John Kasich, I think, is trying to get organized, if you will. I think he's getting much more visible, and I would think you'll hear from John, not perhaps in May, but in June or July.
And Bill, finally, back to the Clinton campaign. Are they worried, Bill? Can you tell?
Yeah, I think they're worried. And just the fact that she is not out talking to the media is a sign that they are thrown off. I think they were thrown off by just the how the Schweitzer book resonated, how the media picked up and ran with it. And I think they're a little bit caught behind here right now. They're still running the last campaign, and they're trying the same tactics from 20 years ago. A lot's changed in the last 20 years.
Bill Whalen of the Hoover Institution, Larry Kudlow, CNBC and Kudlow Radio on the Weekend. I'm John Batchelor.